Hello and welcome to the Political Opinions podcast, where every opinion is given equal footing and political tolerance and debate are given their proper attention in a world where both are on the decline. Today's episode will go over the different opinions on the layout of electoral constituencies in relation to the population size versus the size of the geographic area. Currently, constituencies in the UK and most electoral districts in the world are divided by population, and this can result in some constituencies, such as those in major cities, i.e. London, being very small geographically, while others in the countryside are much larger due to a population that is much more spread out. There is division over whether electoral districts should be divided via area or population, with each one having its own benefits and costs. The aim of this episode will not be to try and argue for or against one particular side of this debate, but rather to highlight the different opinions on the topic and provide a comparison between them. I will begin with the arguments in favour of population distribution, followed by geographic size, with a comparison at the end. The first argument in favour of sorting the electoral areas by population is that it prevents representative inequality. For example, if a constituency exists and it's done by geography and it has only half the population of its neighbouring constituency, then the voters in the smaller constituency will be more proportionally represented by their local MP. And this makes it easier for this group or members within a constituency to lobby the MP and push for change when the population is smaller, because the MP has to deal with less high numbers, essentially, of people coming in and asking them to do certain things. If there's only half the population, chances are only half as many things are being requested of them. Obviously, this could change, but that's just a very simplistic example. And as such, it means that an MP is more likely to be able to represent a specific group, when, if it's in an area that's done by geography with a high population density, this is the opposite. And as such, doing by population means that no matter the population size, it's all spread out evenly, meaning that people are represented at the same level. And this can also help prevent distortions in the number of constituencies. If it's done by area, constituencies in the countryside will be representing very few people, while perhaps the same number or even less in cities will be representing far more people. Population size also creates electoral equality when it comes to voting. Another simplistic example, if a constituency has 10,000 voters, each person's vote will have more of an impact than a region with 50,000 voters, and this is because each one of those votes will count for more, given that there aren't 49,999 other people voting, but rather only 9,999. Therefore, in order to ensure that everyone's vote counts equally, electoral regions need to be done via population in order to prevent this scenario occurring. And finally, sorting by population can help ensure that voter demographics do not create inequality. For example, the Conservative Party traditionally wins rural votes, and Labour and other more left-wing parties traditionally win urban votes. As such, if it is distributed by geographical area, it means that more conservative-favoured constituencies would exist, while more Labour voters would be confined into massively densely populated constituencies with a similar geographical area to one, perhaps maybe even 1% of a population within a city. Moving on now to geographical size. In representative democracies, areas that are scarcely populated can often result in voters finding it hard to be represented by their MP. A massive constituency, in terms of geographical size, with lots of local villagers, will find it hard to go to their MP for support if they're all miles away from each other, and it will make it harder to coordinate campaigns and movements across an entire electoral district. And this could be worsened if your MP is someone you did not vote for and is perhaps from a different town or village, as it becomes then even harder to coordinate action with an MP so far away. And as such, if you have each electoral district being the same geographical size, it can help to ensure that distance does not become a barrier to people having their MP represent them. Furthermore, when distributed by population, it can create communities to be divided. For example, if you have a geographically large area, with one community being on the outskirts of a city and the other one being miles away in the countryside, away from that city, you will often have different voter tendencies. The people on the outskirts of the city are more likely to be Labour or left-wing. The people in the countryside are more likely to be right-wing or conservative. And as such, you have a district here in which these two sides will come into contention. And due to the nature of first-past-the-post, it results in one of these sides being unrepresented. And given that it is a large geographical area, this only aggravates the problem more of their MP not truly representing them. Furthermore, some argue that by dividing an area by geography, you can actually help to reduce gerrymandering, as populations cannot be compacted into strange shapes. If you do in a geographically uniform way, well, for example, a common shape, for example, this can help prevent gerrymandering because it's done by area, not by population, and as such, you cannot simply distribute different aspects of the population into different areas to make them equal. Now, essentially the same argument can be made on the other side, but on this side they believe that it will better help reduce gerrymandering. And finally, population distribution can cause cities to be unfairly overrepresented. This is more of an example for the US than the UK, but essentially one of the main arguments against having a direct vote for the president is that it would result in presidents truly only caring about those voters in the cities because they make up the vast majority of the population, and all of these massively distributed rural voters aren't as important because their votes simply don't count as much. And as such, if you do it by geography, it results in more fair results, essentially, and allows everyone to be represented and not just those in the richest and most highly populated areas. And then finally, this is more of a point of confusion rather than an actual argument, but essentially a lot of people view the geographical size, or the population size rather, in terms of geography as misleading. For example, if you look at the latest US presidential election, in states where Biden won the vast majority of the vote, or the majority of the vote even in some cases, he did not win many constituencies or electoral regions, and that's because he won the cities, and all of the countryside, all of those counties were won by Trump and the Conservatives, and as such it creates a distortion where the entire map is red except for a few small blue points. However, those points were the ones which ultimately led Biden to win, and this kind of furthers into that viewpoint of cities being overly represented because it allows the more densely populated areas to be dominant, and the more spread out areas that cover the vast majority of the area but are in a minority of the population to be disregarded. Moving on now to the comparison. On the question of which voters are more affected, in terms of distributing by population, they believe that it prevents smaller rural areas from having too much power, which can result in traditionally more right-wing and conservative parties and voters being overrepresented, and as such population is needed to prevent this. However, those who believe that electoral districts should be distributed by geography may argue that doing so prevents rural voters from being disregarded in favour of highly populated cities. This is an argument mainly put forward by Republicans in the US, and one of the arguments, they oppose direct democracy essentially to vote the president because it can create distortions whereby highly populated areas become the only ones that matter. Then on the question of representation, especially in regards to the UK and MPs, those arguing for population distribution argue that it ensures an MP represents an equal number of people and prevents a situation where certain areas receive more per person representation than others, which can make it harder for some parties, especially bigger ones with more population, to be represented by an MP, on the basis that those with a smaller population can more easily lobby their MP for change. However, those on the other side would say that doing by geography prevents MPs representing a wide and spread out electoral district, whereby voters may be distant and may be more likely to be differing in views than in a smaller and compacted area. And as such, this can create a situation where voters find it harder to meet their MP due to them being a longer distance away. And then finally, on the question of elections, those in favour of population distribution argue that it prevents voters in some areas having more power with their votes than other areas. For example, an area in which there are only 10,000 votes each vote counts more than an area where there are 50,000 votes, and as such, it should be done by population because it ensures that everyone's vote is worth the same and prevents voters in largely densely populated areas being essentially hemmed in to one constituency and being underrepresented, while those on the other side would argue that this isn't even much of a point on the basis that safe seats exist. If you have 10,000 Labour voters or 100,000 Labour, or if you have 10,000 voters in a city or 100,000 voters in a city, chances are Labour's going to win. If 99% of them are Labour, it doesn't matter which number to these people is being voted, the result is the same. However, this can ignore the bigger problem, essentially, of the whole idea of equal representation. Overall then, those in favour of population distribution are more likely to be from highly concentrated areas whereby the population distribution is necessary for fairness in terms of elections and representation, while those supporting geographical distribution are more likely to be rural voters as they are negatively affected by large areas of scarcely populated votes, although voters from any region could have these opinions. Overall, most politicians and people tend to support population distribution as it creates more equality in relation to representative democracy, and it will be unlikely that geography becomes the deciding factor anytime in the future. The biggest problem is not the criteria for distribution, but the means of doing so, and gerrymandering is the final step to be eliminated for elections to become fair regardless of how they are distributed. Overall though, what are your thoughts on the topic? Is there anything that I missed or got wrong or could do better? Let me know in the comments or on Twitter, and be sure to check back on Friday for another episode. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you all soon.